Welcome to everyone, friends, teachers, family. Welcome to episode 2 of Rekla Reflections. Our title today is Leadership the Finnish Way, Trust, Autonomy, and Student Voice. And we're going to be talking about a flipped classroom today and how we can promote leadership in this particular teaching strategy. So, if you were with us last week, wonderful. I'm so glad you're back. My name is Vanessa. If you are new to our podcast, thank you for joining. So, last week we explored the idea of leadership in school and talked about how it is more effective if we encourage our students to lead as opposed to expecting our teachers and leadership to model that. Yes, it is important for them to model leadership, but really, we want to pass that baton on to the students so that they feel ownership and take on leadership roles in the school. So that conversation last week was sort of what I used to plant the seed for this idea of leadership with students. And today we're going to just water that a little bit by adding a flipped classroom and how we can connect those two. So we're going to talk about leadership in the Finnish way. We're using Finnish pedagogy. Rekla is aligned with Finnish pedagogy. So everything that I do or talk about comes back to Finnish education. So through trust, autonomy, and real student voice, we're going to explore leadership. I want to connect those values to this particular teaching approach, the flipped classroom. Perhaps you've heard of it, maybe not. It's a fairly simple strategy to implement. It doesn't take a lot of extra work on your part, and I will explain more shortly. But my hope is that you'll walk away not just with theory, but with one small practical step that you can try right away. One of the things that you'll learn at Rekla Reflections is that everything I do, I want to make practical application. It's great to talk about theory and strategies and all that stuff, but I really want you walking away with something that you can apply in the classroom. I've seen lots of posts on different social medias where teachers talk about how the training is just sort of theoretical and it's not hands-on, it's not practical application, and it doesn't benefit them as much as they would like. And so I really want Rekla to be one of those places where you can come and learn something that you can apply immediately in your classroom. So I will always be giving out tools, sharing how to use them, how to implement them, and oftentimes I will take you back to our Rekla store where you can see lesson plans and bundles actually using these strategies and topics that we talk about in the podcast. So let's get to leadership the Finnish way. What exactly does that mean? Maybe some of you have been following in Finland how they're doing education, #1 in the world kind of thing, but I want to talk more specifically about that. So instead of assuming that leadership belongs to adults, I want you to imagine what it would look like if leadership actually started with the students. If you came to school every day and instead of the students being there passively learning, they were there ready to activate their learning, take a hold of their journey and really guide themselves or drive themselves. So today I want to take that idea deeper because Finnish pedagogy shows us exactly how trust, autonomy, and real student voice create the foundation for student leadership. In Finnish classrooms, students are given responsibility, and that's not just at the higher grades. That's all the way at the beginning, from day 1, kindergarten, first grade. So they're trusted to make choices, to collaborate, to reflect on their learning. The classroom is student-centered. Students are active participants, not passive learners. And so what I want to do is with this podcast is to sort of take you through this process of a flipped classroom, not so much as a teacher, but as a learner, right? So we start with an inquiry and we move through the process so you can feel and see how it works. So think of this as your classroom. I'm guiding you through questions, sharing strategies, and inviting you to reflect, just like you would invite your own students to do in the classroom. And just so you know, this isn't something that I've made up or invented. Finland has been carefully reforming and researching its education since the 1960s. Decades of international studies show that when students are trusted with autonomy, they consistently perform better, not just on tests, but in life skills like collaboration, reflection, and creative problem solving. If you want to learn more about those research studies, you can always look up a gentleman named Pasi Sahlberg's his book, Finnish Lessons and Research on Finland's 1970s Comprehensive Reforms. And there's lots of others out there too. You can just Google and find. So, when I say that this works, we have models in Finland that have been tested for more than 50 years, and Finland is seeing those results because the students are ranking at the top in the world. So, let's just take a moment to reflect on what we've heard so far. Think back for me to when you were maybe a student yourself. Did you ever have a teacher who trusted you with real responsibility? How did that feel? And how might you offer that same trust to your students today? I'll just share a brief memory that I have when I was a student in school. So in sixth grade, I went to a public school. It was sixth, seventh, and eighth grade. And there were over 3,000 students in those three grades. So it was this massive, massive school. Classrooms were large. Teachers were very busy doing paperwork, giving tests and grading them and recording all the results, and just sort of bogged down in all of what it takes to run a very, very large school. And they're busy, right? Teachers are busy. But I have a very distinct memory of my sixth grade history teacher. She took the time to work with me, to talk with me, to give me responsibilities in the class, to allow me to take my own learning path in the assignments. And it was very, very changing for me. I remember that year, and I remember a lot of other things too that aren't as pleasant in such a large school, but I remember she was an incredible teacher, and I learned a lot in that class. So that's the spark that Finnish pedagogy leans into and what Rekla is all about. We want to multiply those sparks until leadership becomes the culture of your classroom, right? Leadership, trust, autonomy. That's what we want for our students. So, what exactly is a flipped classroom? Let's get into this. We actually give students more of these leadership opportunities. And by using a flipped classroom, it actually lends itself quite well to leadership and student autonomy. So, if this term, flipped classroom, is new to you, let me break it down just a little bit. In the traditional model, teachers explain the lesson, the students practice, do worksheets, whatever, and then they go home and they do homework to show that they learned whatever it was they were being taught. In a flipped classroom, the order is reversed. Students begin with input, either a reading or a video or just simply an inquiry question. The teacher will say at the end of that section, hey, this is what you guys need to look for, this inquiry question, and let me know what you find, right? Very open-ended, not specific, okay, find, 2 facts and a question, nothing. It's just open-ended for the students. And then the class goes home and they explore and they learn. And then when class time comes again the next day, they, instead of using that time to listen to a lecture, they get to use collaboration, group learning, creating, exploring. So here's an example. If your topic is, say, habitats, instead of lecturing, your inquiry question would be, how do animals adapt to where they live? Students start exploring that question on their own at home. Maybe the family goes to the zoo, they take a look, whatever, how creative they want to be. And then they come back to class and the teacher can divide them into small groups. And instead of listening to more lecture, since they already have the information, they can share what they've learned. They can start on projects. They can have discussions. They can do experiments. It frees up so much time during the school day if the students have already prepared what they are supposed to be learning. So the classroom stays student-centered, but the role as teacher shifts. You're not disappearing. You're not repositioning. You're just repositioning. Instead of being the controller of behavior, you're the guide who notices, supports, and asks the next good question. So, flipped classrooms as Finnish leadership. Why does the flipped classroom align so beautifully with Finnish pedagogy? Because it's built on the same foundation: trust, autonomy, and voice. We trust the students to do the pre work. Then they choose their learning path. They decide what they're interested in based on the inquiry question, and they follow that path wherever it takes them. At school, then the students have the opportunity to lead, share their ideas, share their investigations, and they can design how they're going to share it. They can find other students in the class that like doing a play, or maybe they want to do a model, a shadow box, or maybe there's a video, or something else, whatever creative juices they have, and then they can share that learning so that it's completely student centered. If flipping everything feels too big, maybe you're thinking, oh my word, that's way too much freedom for my class. It's a really big class. How am I ever going to do something like that? Just start small. You'll see the results. It takes time, right? Baby steps. So maybe this week or for this month, just choose one lesson that you want to flip and see how it goes. Offer 2 or 3 projects. Maybe minimize the number of options for presentation to just a few so that you can keep a better eye on it and help you with your assessment, continual assessments. Model reflection for students so that they can learn what responsibility looks like. Let's imagine, all right, a group decides to make a mini documentary about desert animals. One student becomes the narrator, another does the research, another is directing, and you didn't assign the roles, right? They stepped up. They're like, oh, they're so excited about this project, and they've learned so much, right? They have guidelines. Obviously, there's a rubric they have to follow, but they get to choose how it's presented and what they share, and it just really drives them and motivates them. And that's Finnish pedagogy alive in your class. So, some benefits and challenges of a flipped classroom. For students, they take ownership of their learning. They practice collaboration, responsibility, which is a huge learning way to learn, and their voices are given value and they're allowed to create freely, right? So, they really grab on to this. For teachers, guess what? Not so much lecturing, right? You don't have the responsibility of being the know-it-all in the class. It's not your job to know everything about habitats. Your job is to guide. You are simply guiding the students, giving them inquiry questions, asking them to think more deeply, challenging them on some of their thoughts. But your job is support, to guide. So the pressure of lecturing, not there. You have space to observe and give feedback. So doing your assessments, making sure you have marking for their learning becomes easier because now you're like the assistant in the class, right? The students are the teachers per se, at least in their small groups. And you can just be the assistant. You can walk around, you can ask questions, you can observe, you can do assessments. And it's natural. And you see your students' strengths more clearly than you would with an exam. But let's be honest, right? There are challenges. What if, sometimes students don't prepare for the class? And that will slow things down. That's when we partner with other students who are prepared and let them help each other. Sometimes maybe you guys, as teachers, you might feel nervous about letting go and letting the students sort of run with it. But that doesn't mean chaos. It's just guidelines, right? You're still going to set the outer boundaries of the direction of the sort of the outer edges of where you want them to go, and then they can choose within that area. And those feelings are totally normal. It doesn't mean that you're failing. It just means that it's new. You as a teacher are going to be new to this teaching strategy. And when you first introduce this in the class, the students are going to be a little bit concerned as well. Oh, teacher expects me to know all this stuff. How am I going to learn it all? And they're going to be nervous themselves. So there might need to be some support on both sides. But the solution is just start small, scaffold at first, keep reflections consistent so students build responsibility. Remember, you're not stepping aside, you're stepping into a new role. And so are the students. The classroom still stays student-centered and you gain freedom to guide. So we'll go back to that reflection prompt now that we've had a little more discussion about flipped classrooms. Think back again to when you were a student. Was there ever a flipped classroom? Obviously, maybe that didn't exist back then in term or in name, but there were probably some teachers out there that did those kinds of strategies. So maybe you had a teacher like that. How did that feel when you were allowed to guide your learning and choose the direction you wanted to go? Well, that's where leadership begins with trust, offered consistently and gently. So at Rekla, we see the flipped classroom as more than a method. It's a way to live out Finnish pedagogy, where classrooms are always student centered and teachers are free to guide, support, and reflect. To help you try this out, we have our first teaching strategy bundle in our Rekla store. It's a flipped classroom lesson and it's on habitats. I chose grades 3 to 5, but you could see the structure in it and easily adapt it to a higher or a lower grade level. And you'll see the structure, the inquiry question, and the project ideas that let your students step into leadership. It's a simple, ready to use way to try flipped learning without feeling overwhelmed. So here's my encouragement. You don't have to flip your whole classroom overnight. Just take one step. Trust your students, give them space to lead, and watch what happens. Next Thursday, we'll be building on this episode with a topic reflection, not only how to use it with students, but how reflection transforms us as teachers and leaders too. I also have a blog that I wrote that is available today. It's uploaded at my website, www.reklalearningstudios.com, and you can read more about flipped classrooms and how to use them. So until then, I'm Vanessa, and this is Rekla Reflections. Let's keep learning and leading together. Thank you.